As soon as I heard Trump talking about 600,000 Chinese students coming to the US, I said, I got to talk to Gordon Chang about this because I haven't been able to find anybody in MAGA world or anybody anywhere that thinks this is a good idea. So I kind of just wanted to get what was your first take when you heard this coming from Trump?
I couldn't believe it. This is just wrong. And it's wrong for a couple of reasons. First of all, of course, we know that a substantial portion of the Chinese students spy. It's sort of not their fault. I mean, they are coerced into doing it. We got to remember that wherever there are Chinese students, there are either Chinese consular officials or Ministry of State Security agents who monitor, coerce, and surveil them. And so if we're going to more than double the number of Chinese students here, we're going to probably more than double the Ministry of State Security agents here as well. And that's not a good thing because we're already overwhelmed. But the second reason is more important, and that is our educational institutions should, as a matter of first priority, maybe their only priority, is to educate Americans. And every spot that we give to a Chinese student is one fewer spot for an American. So we're robbing our future here. So I think that across the board, this is a really bad idea.
And let me just so I clarify this too. This doesn't mean like Chinese American students, right? This is separate. This is children coming, kids coming from China. This doesn't include American Chinese kids that are here already.
That's right. We're talking about Chinese nationals coming from China. These are people who the Communist Party wants to be here or permits for various reasons. So this whole flow of students, and I can understand what President Trump is probably thinking. He's thinking this is a great trade issue because this certainly helps our balance of payments. Because essentially what we're doing is we're exporting services. But the problem is that China believes it's in its net interest for this to continue, which means it's not in our interest for this to continue. And that's the way the Chinese regime looks at it. But as I mentioned, for other reasons I just talked about, I believe that this certainly is not in America's interest.
Well, that's what I'm trying to play devil's advocate of. I would imagine there has to be some reason Trump is doing this, and I don't know if it's to leverage right now during because the trade deal's still going on here. There's nothing concrete with China, so I think in Trump's mind, if he says no, we're not going to allow any of this, it hurts his negotiation tactics. Is that a part of this? You think?
Well, that's the reverse of the way it is. Because if China Trump is saying, look, this is good for the US. So China is going to look at it and say, well, if we permit students to go to the US, then we're doing the US a favor. So in trade negotiations, they're going to be asking for a concession. So Trump talking about this as some benefit to the US actually undermines his bargaining position when he talks to the Chinese.
Because the benefit is for China in that case. Now, I know that they keep saying that if we don't have this, 15% of the schools are going to fail. I keep hearing that number get thrown out there. So what is that all about?
Well, I mean, obviously, Chinese students come in, they pay full tuition, and they fund a lot of stuff. Now, some of the stuff they fund is does benefit the U.S. So, for instance, people who do research, but also we've got to remember that these universities, especially the elite ones, have bulked up on administrators. So what we're doing is we're paying for all these DEI and CRT administrators. So this is not really in our interest. This is a problem in elite American education. And the Chinese are having to fund it to help us continue something that is obviously not a good thing.
And you know, I seen your post on X, and I'm imagining how difficult this position is for you because you put the. I read it before you came on here for the listeners. My dad arrived in America in February 1945 on a scholarship, and so he received a master's degree in 1946. Just showing you how hard it is for you to disagree with what's going on here. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, my dad received a scholarship from the nationalist government of China. This was during World War II. It was to study engineering. And so he left China in 1944. He arrived in San Pedro, the port of Los Angeles, in 1945 in February, took the Transcontinental Railroad to Ithaca, New York, got his master's degree. And, normally he had always planned to leave, to go back to China. But he couldn't, and a generous America allowed him to stay here. So I have a lot of sympathy for Chinese students, But the problem is, this is a very different era. We're not talking about Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists anymore. We're talking about a communist party that has declared the US to be its enemy. And so this is not helping us, to say the least. And that's why, it's not just a question of theft, it's also a question, our obligation to our own families to educate our young. And, we talk about families here sending their kids to college. Well, this ain't helping them. Uh, I just don't see the other side of the argument.
And I talk about this all the time too. It just seems like the American kids are going to these schools and they're studying gender studies or these ridiculous degrees that don't help them. And the Chinese nationals that come over here, they're not fooling around with those degrees that ain't going nowhere. They're going for the top tier. They're getting the master's degrees in useful, whether it be technology or whatever field it's going to be, medicine. And they're getting the real deal. And while we're sitting there fooling around with these things, the kids are coming out of here buried in debt. And the college system seems like it's completely failed in America. It seems like it's a failed system.
Absolutely. And that's the broader questions, which really don't have to do with China. But the one area where it does deal with China is that Chinese students, by and large, they're not studying gender. They're studying STEM topics, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And that means Americans don't have those places because they're being sold to basically China's future communists. So my point is, let's educate Americans.
What would be your suggestion if you were talking to President Donald Trump and you had a say in the meeting here with this is all going down? What would be your pitch to President Donald Trump on how to handle this?
Well, I'd say, I'd talk about my family's history, but say that, and in America, yeah, we have been enriched by people who have come from other countries who have wanted to live here. As a matter of fact, immigrants are the fiercest defenders of our democracy, because they don't take anything for granted. They know what communism, or they know what totalitarianism looks like, and they don't want to bring it here. But the point is that we're dealing with Chinese students who, by and large, are forced to return. And so, this is not good for our country. If we could educate every American in STEM topics, I'd say, sure, I'd be happy to educate people from Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan or China or wherever. But that's not the case here. We're not educating our own people. America first, Mr. President. That's what I would say.
And I would agree with that, especially when we see the amount of fentanyl that's come through from China, which I believe is an act of war. You've seen the Chinese spy balloons
Absolutely.
flying over our country. This is a country that hates us. This is a country that absolutely hates Americans.
Yeah, the Chinese regime has declared a quote unquote people's war on us. They did that in May 2019 in a landmark editorial from People's Daily, which is the most authoritative source in China. We're Americans, so we don't think propaganda, we just ignore propaganda. But propaganda for a totalitarian regime like China is critically important. They put their best people in it, they spend so much effort on it. And we don't understand what the regime is saying about us. I'm not saying this is the Chinese people, because the Chinese people are the first victims of the communist system. But this is the regime, and this is the regime that is mobilizing its nationals against us. And, just one other thing. China's National Intelligence Law, 2017, Articles 7 and 14, require every Chinese national and every Chinese entity to commit acts of espionage if demanded. And China's communist top-down system, where the Communist Party demands absolute obedience from every Chinese national, means that Chinese nationals, they're required to not only commit acts of espionage, but required to commit acts of sabotage, acts of war against the United States. So that's what we're dealing with. And every time we have Chinese students come here, we have Ministry of State Security agents and Chinese consular officials monitoring them. So if we more than double the number of Chinese students here, we are going to see an influx of Chinese agents and operatives on our soil.
That's frightening, and we know this. I mean, if we know that, our intelligence agencies know this, they're aware of this. So, like, we see it too. You've seen the Chinese national spy inside the NYPD. We caught one there. So you see them popping up everywhere, and it just seems like by doubling it, because right now I think it's 300,000. You're doubling this year, and it's like you said, it's going to double the chances that this is going to go totally south on us. And I can't figure out why in the world, like I said, what is the benefit here to us truly at the end of the deal? What is it that Trump sees? He has to see something. I don't believe Trump is just saying, yeah, I'm going to do this to sabotage America and help China. There has to be some kind of thing that he sees that he's doing this.
Yeah, no, Trump obviously sees it's a benefit to America, but I see it, and a lot of other people see our interests in a very different way. And so, Trump is Trump. He's great. He's got great ideas, and he's not willing to let the bureaucracy to slow him down. And that's terrific almost all the time. But the problem here is that there was nobody, because Trump's a force of nature. So there was nobody in the administration who stood up and said, Mr. President, this is wrong. You should not do this. And so, we got the comments that he's made twice now about the students. So this is not going to be good.
Yeah, and obviously I'm a very big supporter of President Donald Trump, but I'm also an amateur when it comes to China relations. So that's why I'd rather get takes from you and people who know to see, am I missing something here? Am I seeing this wrong,
You're not missing anything. And by the way, experts on China, they generally have a worse view of it than your typical ordinary American who is armed with common sense. We send a lot of people to Georgetown's graduate school of international relations, where we teach them to become stupid. So I'm trusting any American at a truck stop in Tennessee over the person who's got all the degrees from elite universities in international relations. So I'm with you, Alec.
Well, and let me, since we've beaten this kind of to death here. Let me switch the topic here, because another thing that's going on right now is the AI. Right, we're in competition with China with the AI. China has this NVIDIA rival, CambraCon. And they're discouraging their people from getting, buying NVIDIA. So what does this mean to the whole AI relationship here with China?
Yeah. AI is going to determine like the course of the 21st century.
Yeah.
Now, what determines AI? Well, it's chips, and China's chips are not that good. And we learned that a couple of weeks ago when DeepSeek, the AI company, was delaying the release of its R2 model. And the reason why it was delayed was because they were trying to use domestic Chinese chips, Huawei's of Send, in place of NVIDIA's chips. So here's another area where a number of Americans, especially security professionals, disagree with President Trump, because President Trump has said he's willing to give export licenses for NVIDIA's H20 chip, which is like the third or fourth string chip. But China doesn't want the third or fourth string chip. It wants something better. And now NVIDIA is trying to persuade the administration to give permission for an advanced NVIDIA chip to sell to China. Really, really bad idea.
Yeah, because they're saying that China is trying to triple their output of AI chips, and like you said, AI. This is the future. It's coming at us at Mach 3. I mean, it's here, but we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, and so this is like a space race in a sense to see who's going to get on top of the game. And it's another one of these things where it would seem like we would be helping out the Chinese if we were to do this with NVIDIA. No.
Yes, I mean, and that's clear from what we saw from DeepSeek. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, he makes a decent argument. He says, look, we want to keep China addicted to America's technology stack. I can sort of understand that, but the problem is when you look at the reality of it, if China doesn't have American chips, it doesn't really, it gets delayed and delayed and delayed on AI. And speed is important in this race, because whoever gets the world to adopt their models for AI is going to eventually prevail. And so helping China speed up is not in our interest.
Well, also too, we'll be educating them here too in our country. So it just seems like the whole thing is working. It really doesn't make any sense to me, Gordon.
Yep, and I wish you were running policy.
All right. Well, Gordon Chang, I appreciate you jumping on here. Like I said, as soon as I heard this, I said, I got to get your take on it because it really, I love President Donald Trump and support him. But when it comes to things like this, and I heard him say it twice, and then I can't, and I look through my list of people that I follow that, that I believe are in like the know, and I can't find anybody that agreed with it. And I'm like, I must be missing something here. That's what's got me on this.
You're not missing anything.
All right, Gordon Chang, I hope you'll come back and see me again soon. Thanks for joining me today on the Alec Lace Show.
Oh, well, thank you, Alec. I really appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Emily, and I'm at the White House with my dad, and you're watching The Alec Lace Show.
You're listening to The Alec Lace Show. The future is family.